Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Nora?
Good. Good. I'm so happy to talk with you. Ziyaad Yusef, my friend and co-conspirator on peace and justice issues here in Palestine. I appreciate so much your time talking to me today. I wanted to ask you some questions about Red Dead. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Good. You and I know each other from EWASH, a coalition of 30 or more uh, international and local NGOs that are working on water and sanitation issues here in Palestine. And I know from my work with you there that you are maybe the most brilliant, knowledgeable, insightful, and reasonable person that I know. So it's just a huge honor to be able to interview you for my blog and to let folks that I know hear you talk directly about Red Dead, which I bet they've never even heard of before. What is
Yeah.
it?
So the Red Dead Canal is an idea that came about in 2002. Israel and Jordan want to build a canal to link the Red Sea in the south and the Dead Sea. And the reason for that is because the Dead Sea has been shrinking at an alarming rate, 1.5 meters every year, to the point that it might disappear. Used to be in 1948 and before one single body of water. Now, if you look at the map, now the Dead Sea is split into two, and it continues to shrink very quickly. So they want to build this canal, quote unquote, to save the Dead Sea.
What would happen if the Dead Sea wasn't saved? Why is the Dead Sea important except for obvious historical and cultural reasons?
Here's the catch. The Dead Sea is naturally replenished by the Jordan River. People would know about the Jordan River because of its biblical significance, but it's really a system. The Jordan River is replenished by other rivers that come from Syria, from Jordan, from Lebanon, and from within the 48 areas, Israel. And it used to replenish the Dead Sea as well as support the people along the river and the livelihoods of the people and people's cultures and so on. But since 1948 and after, in particular in the early 60s, Israel has built a national water carrier to divert the flow of the Jordan River. To a minor extent, Jordan and Syria also divert a part of the river. But that was the actual reason for the Dead Sea to shrink. Basically, the diversion of the Jordan River. Today, the flow that reaches the Dead Sea is a mere 3% of the original flow that the Dead Sea used to receive in 48. And so the people that used to live off the river and from the river, the water that they used to use for their supply, for their agriculture, for fishing, there was a thriving fishing community in the Jordan Valley, has now disappeared. And in fact, the biggest losers in all of this have been the Palestinians. Palestinians today are not allowed to even reach the shores of the Dead Sea, but even if they did, all that they would find would be sewage water, because this is what the Jordan River has turned into. It's basically sewage water from Israeli towns up in the north that reach the Dead Sea. And so herein lies the problem with this Dead Red project, is that the project is a costly project. It costs over $10 billion.
10 billion US dollars.
10 billion US dollars.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, yes, for a problem which could have been solved by simply adhering to international law, which will be almost cost-free, i.e. let the Jordan River flow. And if you let the Jordan River flow, the Dead Sea would be saved. That's all. The water that is being diverted is illegally being diverted to only one party, through the national water carrier, which takes the water from Lake Tiberias in the north to Israeli communities in the center as well as in the south to the Negev desert. Palestinians who also have rights to the river do not have access to even a single drop. In addition, the water is used very irresponsibly. So Israeli agriculture and farming is very water intensive. And so basically, I mean, there's one party which is gaining the water. There's another party which is losing the water and their rights. And they want to build a canal to legitimize those actions in the north and divert attention from the crimes that are being committed in the north against the environment, against people's rights, and all of this to be internationally sponsored because obviously neither Israel or Jordan wants to pay for a 10 billion canal to quote-unquote save the Dead Sea. So they brought a number of international and private players. So the World Bank is the main player in promoting this project. They're also calling this a project for peace because it enhances cooperation, which is definitely a fake premise, and if you want, I can talk more about that. As well as private actors. It will be a project built by private contractors, so it will be mainly, I would say, Israeli contractors because they have the expertise in desalination and the engineering. So it's a bad deal overall for everyone, really.
Can you, before you go on too much on the project, which I want to hear about, I'm not sure I understood exactly why. I mean, it's enough perhaps the environmental and the cultural and the historical aspects of the Dead Sea, but are those the reasons why they feel it's worth $10 billion to replenish the Dead Sea? Obviously, the Jordan River should flow. Okay, let's put that aside for a second. Why are these folks willing to spend $10 billion to replenish the Dead Sea?
It's very simple. I mean, I didn't really talk about the broader situation. And we need to understand what's happening in the West Bank and in Gaza. You cannot dissociate the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, and the politics or the water politics of the region without understanding what's happening. At the moment, I mean, one thing that I would like to break, which is a myth, is that this region is a region which is scarce in water. In fact, there is abundant water resources. Just to give you an example, it rains more in the city of Ramallah, in the West Bank, than in London. And everyone around the world knows London from the rain, from the gray weather. So the West Bank and this region in general, it has a lot of water stored underneath the ground in the aquifers. The problem is that all of this plentiful water is fully controlled by Israel, including the water in the occupied Palestinian territories. Of course, under international law, that water has to be shared equitably and fairly between both parties, which is not happening. Palestinians, as Amnesty International and countless bodies of human rights organizations, as well as the UN, have attested to, have only access to a trickle of that water, which is well below their human rights. So the human right to water per person would be 100 liters a day. Palestinians have access to as little as 70 liters a day, and some communities even go less than 20 liters a day, which is the levels you would find in large humanitarian crises and in sub-Saharan Africa.
You're talking about 20 liters per day per person.
Per person in certain areas, in particular, and this is how interesting this is, in particular those communities in the Jordan Valley. They are the driest communities, and those are the ones which should have access to the river, the rightful share of the river, as opposed to Israelis. I mean, if you look at the Jordan Valley, where the Jordan River flows, there are a number of settlements. In total, 9,000 Israeli settlers live amongst almost 200,000 Palestinians. And those settlers take the water, those 8,000 settlers, equivalent to a third of what 2.5 million Palestinians drink. So 8,000 versus 2.5 million Palestinians.
Now you're talking about the settlers are taking the water not only for drinking water, but for agricultural purposes.
For profitable agriculture, yes, and which is mostly exported to markets abroad, in particular to Europe. The biggest consumer of the settler agriculture industry, which uses Palestinian water and water from the Jordan River, are foreign markets, so which are sustaining that agriculture practice and the theft of water, basically.
Okay, so we were talking about a regional situation where there is enough water, if it was well distributed, fairly distributed, and in accordance with international law, there's enough water, but that the Israeli government and the settlers are stealing water that Palestinians have right to, and you're talking about water in the Jordan Valley and across or along, let's say, the Jordan River. And as that water is stolen and used, not enough water gets to the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is drying up. Now, the international community wants to resolve that issue by building this canal, which is called Red Sea, Dead Sea. What do you mean a canal? When I think of a canal, I think of like an open ditch through land. Is that what you're talking about? Literally a canal, and then the water would be pumped or would flow naturally from the Red Sea to replenish the Dead Sea? Could you just talk a little bit more about the project?
Yes, but before I go into that, you did summarize the situation very well, but I would like just to add very quickly also that this is a situation where there is a clear violation of international law and human rights. You know, taking someone else's water is not legal, and it's a clear violation. And the idea of the canal really is to ask you accountability and is ask you compliance of international law. International actors, in particular the US, the World Bank, the European Union, they do not want to force Israel to comply with international law, to respect Palestinian rights, and instead they're diverting the issue, changing the subject. So they're coming up with this costly project to literally change the subject. Let's not talk about all of the violations of international law, of people who are starving of water, which have their lives destroyed because they cannot continue their farming, which are abandoning their fields and allowing for settlements to grow. Let's change the subject for that to continue as business as usual, and let's actually help you to continue doing that so you don't get the flack and the guilt and the culpability of having the Dead Sea shrink. And we'll just build you a canal. So this is, I think, the key point. It's that Red Dead Canal is all about changing the subject. But now to your original question, it would be a canal, basically. It would be an open canal, like the national water carrier that you see inside Israel, that would use the force of gravity, because the Dead Sea is under the sea level, and it will take the water from the Red Sea, which is higher in altitude, to the Dead Sea. Along the way, it also is boasting about certain benefits. So it would be it would use a lot of energy, but it would also use the force of gravity. So it might be an energy, self-creating energy, which can supply certain small towns in Jordan. This is they're trying to sell. But also, in addition, you would make use of a desalination plant. So the whole idea is that there will be a desalination plant to be built in the Jordan city of Aqaba. The memorandum of understanding for the desalination plant was just recently signed in Washington, D.C. late last year, which is the first stage for this canal. And the desalination plant will supply water to Jordan. So the main benefit for Jordan is really not about saving the Dead Sea, but Jordan is starved of water. So their main interest to have the canal is to have water from Amman and water from other Jordanian cities, because they lack the water.
Well, so in other words, what Israelis would consider Israeli water is going to Jordan, and that's for free, or they're going to be paying for it?
No, the desalination plant will be built inside Jordan, and it would come from seawater. So it's really like the water from the sea. I mean, I wouldn't say it means anything to anyone. I mean, the Israeli city of Eilat would receive some of their water, and the deal has already been signed whereby Jordan will supply some of the water from the desalination plant in Aqaba to Eilat in exchange for Israel to supply some of the water in Tiberias the Jordanian cities in the north, including the refugee camp in Zatari, because there has been a big influx of Syrian refugees and so on. But also to say that some of that water, the water that Israel is supplying in exchange, is rightful Jordanian water. But because Israel holds it and it has the power, does this all of the shady deals basically that basically says the water is not free. I will give you your rights if you pay for it, or if it's in a water exchange or something like that.
But it sounded like all these countries are working together to share the water better. That sounds really good, Ziyaad. What's the problem with that? I mean, as you talk about the project, it really sounds like a regional solution. It sounds like a long-term solution. It sounds like everybody's giving and everybody's getting. What am I missing?
Yeah. Well, Jordan definitely will wants the project because they want to get the water. For them, it's also about sustaining their government, the regime in Jordan. You know, if there's a water scarcity as it is predicted, it will be a political issue at the end of the day. People want to have water. Israel wants also the canal because it would allow attention to be diverted to what is happening in the West Bank and delay accountability. Really, the biggest losers are the Palestinians. In an ideal world, such cooperations would happen if were on an equitable basis. But this is being done really on the back of the Palestinian people, because the Palestinian Authority has been part of the plans and so on, being so dependent on those donor countries for their own survival. So they've been going along, but ultimately the Palestinian people are the ones who are going to be to lose in this deal. One of the main reasons I would say is because their water rights will be further deteriorated. They currently don't have their water rights, but in the future, one thing I didn't mention is this project aims to also sell desalinated water to Palestinians in the West Bank. So basically, it's saying that Israel can continue taking the cheap water under the ground in the West Bank for itself. In turn, it can sell Palestinians expensive desalinated water. And as a result, you would create a private market for water for Palestinians, a profit-making market. And the winners are those who are getting the profit, basically. And Israel has not hidden the fact, and it says publicly that it's ready to export water, and it's looking for a market because Israel has a water surplus. And Palestinians, obviously, is the #1 market for that desalinated water. Then comes the Jordanians. The water that Israel will supply in the north very likely will be desalinated water, also expensive, which Jordan might have to foot some of the bill. It's basically a dream for the private market, a dream for neoliberalism, a dream for those who are appropriating illegally Palestinian water. It's basically you are going to sell the occupied people expensive desalinated water. What better deal you can get? And because they're hostage, they're forced to buy it in silence. So they will accept to their the violations of their own rights in silence and without agency. I think that's the sort of goal of to buy Palestinian acquiescence and force them to sell their rights.
Okay, so let me just go into that a little bit. Forcing Palestinians to give up their rights. Didn't the Palestinian Authority, aren't they a partner in this? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, the Palestinian Authority has been a full partner in this whole project idea. I mean, they weren't initially part of the plans when it was conceived in 2002. They forced themselves into the deal. They protested and so on, so the World Bank brought them into the whole project. And then there was a study that took about 5 years to complete. They call it the feasibility study. Then to study also the the consequences, the environmental and socioeconomic consequences of the Red Dead.
That was a
And
World Bank study?
yes, it was a World Bank study to sort of study the feasibility. The study itself cost millions of dollars. And the PA was one of the partners of the study, and they facilitated consultations in the West Bank for civil society, and similar consultations happened in Israel and in Jordan.
And what
And
the
when I
findings?
said, I said at this point that the finding, well, first of all, the report, they hid the report for a long time. I mean, it's a report which has 1,321 pages, and they did not publish it online, and they did not want to make the findings available. But I mean, one of the findings would, they didn't, I mean, the findings was not conclusive in the sense that, oh, it is feasible and there won't be any consequences to it. It was mainly a technical study, so I think engineering-wise it is possible. But environmentally-wise, I mean, one thing that would happen is that the water of the Dead Sea, which is of a different mineral composition, would mix with the water of the Red Sea, and it would almost permanently damage the unique characteristics of the Dead Sea. But in addition, I mean, they also showed other consequences of it. For example, the energy-intensive use of desalination, so the need for a lot of energy to run the desalination plant in Aqaba, as well as that it might really not solve the problem, but in a long term compound it. For example, the depletion of the Dead Sea has also affected the nearby aquifers for the Palestinians, especially the eastern aquifer that Palestinians use right now as their primary source of water. It has encouraged the depletion, so the study didn't even address those areas. So it was an incomplete study. I would say it took 5 years to do, and ultimately was self-serving to advance the project.
Was it published and was it released in Arabic or only in English?
Only in English, of course. And I insisted when I was talking that it should be available in Arabic because the prime beneficiaries both in Jordan and in Palestine speak Arabic, and that was not made available, of course. But I would also like to say, I mean, when I mentioned that the project is designed to put Palestinians into silence, that doesn't mean that happened. I mean, throughout this whole process, Palestinian civil society, activist groups, NGOs, and so on have vocally protested against the Dead Red project. And they will continue to do so. Just recently, they collectively issued a statement condemning the Red Dead Canal and emphasizing the need for Israel to respect Palestinian water rights. And they are planning more action against it, including targeting the Palestinian Authority for being part of this possession of Palestinian rights. And hopefully there will be alliances also with Jordanian civil society. So it actually gave impetus for greater mobilization at the local level. To show also that really, I mean, the World Bank is promoting the project as something that is beneficial to Palestinians, but Palestinians themselves don't think so. In fact, 2 years ago, I took a delegation from the World Bank, the inspection panel, to the Jordan Valley to listen directly to the communities directly affected by the Red Dead Canal, and this is what they said to this World Bank delegation. And the delegation acknowledged that in a correspondence with us, but they've decided not to take the case forward for now, and they said you can issue a complaint when the project is in motion, i.e. when it's almost too late. But that's the sort of machination that has been happening. The World Bank has been less than honest throughout this whole process, including, for example, the consultations that they did towards this 5 years in the development of the canal has been done in five-star hotels. So they did so in the Movenpick in Ramallah, in the Intercontinental Jericho. I mean, peasants who are living, first of all, several miles away, those directly affected, with barely any means to make it to the big cities, let alone to a venue which is completely antagonistic to them and to their lifestyle. I mean, it just shows the barriers that they put around, which they were really not interested to listen to the peasants, to the communities, and in their language, but he was mostly interested to tick boxes and say, hey, we run consultations, and this is what Palestinians think. But nevertheless, even in those five-star hotel consultations, people were very vocal, criticizing it, but it all fell in deaf ears, and it's an agenda plan from above, which, as I said, is designed to disempower the people.
Well, let me ask you one final question, because this is the type of project that might be on page 113 of some newspaper in the United States, where someone might read it and not really understand it until perhaps it's on the ground, it's big, it's huge, it's finished, it's done, and then they might kind of get the importance of something like this. Now here we are at the beginning. It hasn't even started implementation. What would you say to someone who's sitting in Los Angeles or in Chicago or in Paris or in Dubai? Why is this something they need to know about, and what should they do about it, if anything?
Well, first and foremost, for me, their prime motivation should be about, if they really care for peace and justice, they would care for this blatant theft of water that is happening in the occupied territories by Israel, and they would be interested in a canal because it would be yet another attempt to thwart Palestinian water rights for good. So they should oppose it on that basis because they care and believe that Palestinians are equal human beings and they deserve the right to water. If they don't care about the Palestinians, I mean, at least the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea and the Jordan River has also a reputation which is global in nature. I mean, it's historic. And this, first of all, they would probably don't even know that the Jordan River doesn't exist anymore. It's a pile of sewage, and they should demand, for the river to flow and to replenish the Dead Sea, and to avert the destruction that that canal will do to the Dead Sea, to completely change the unique characteristics of this world heritage, which belongs to the world and not only to the greedy actions of one state or another. It's a world heritage. But I would still emphasize it's really, Palestinian rights which should be at the forefront. And if people really care about peace and justice, they should oppose this canal.
Is there a good way to oppose it? I mean, what does one do? How should one speak, or to whom, or what do we do?
There are really several ways. I mean, first of all, you would want to be alert on what's going to happen as the next steps, and you would want to express your protests to the right parties. So once a campaign is launched, and I do hope that a campaign is launched very soon, the campaign will develop concrete asks both for an internal audience, i.e. Palestinians towards the Palestinian Authority, but hopefully also internationally for the largest donors to the World Bank, which will ultimately finance the project, i.e. European and Western states, but also Brazil and other large emerging donors to the World Bank, to be responsible and cancel this disastrous project and actually enforce accountability and push for the water of the Jordan River to flow. We already had some allies. I mean, the European Union Parliament, for example, back in 2010, they passed a resolution to save the Jordan River. They expressed their disappointment that the river is completely destroyed, and they asked for Israel to take steps for allowing the water to flow its natural course and not divert it with the dam as it currently does. So once there is a campaign, that's one way. But at the same time, I mean, one of the main parties to the Red Dead Canal would be the Israeli water company Murad, which is also heavily involved in the occupied Palestinian territories in taking water from Palestinians. And Murad now has embarked in an aggressive expansion program internationally to gain contracts in other countries to develop their water, and based on the so-called expertise that they gain in stealing water from Palestinians. So there are activist groups all over the world campaigning against Murad. So, for example, in Greece, Murad wants to privatize the water from Athens and Thessaloniki, two of the Greek cities, which the government itself is putting out for privatization. But still, campaign activist groups are campaigning so the Murad consortium doesn't win the deal, also that the water is not privatized first and foremost as a matter of principle. Same thing in Rome. Murad is part of a consortium that wants to privatize water in Italy, and there are campaign activist groups also to bring it accountable. In Buenos Aires, Murad won a contract to supply water locally, and activist groups are active in Brazil, in Portugal, in the US. So you have a target locally which you can pick, which is deeply involved both in the canal but also in gross violations of international law that you can build campaigns around. And those most likely will come to your city very soon. I mean, they're rapidly expanding, so the likelihood you there that listening to me right now having a Murad, potentially Murad coming into your town or state, it's very high. So be alert and do some research and build some campaigns based on strong facts.
And is there anything we need to do with the World Bank? I mean, the World Bank, it puts itself out as one that is responsive and interested in feedback from communities. It has a broad range of stakeholders. All of us are, in a way, stakeholders because our governments contribute and participate in World Bank activities. World Bank has led this, has led it, from what you've described, in a not very responsible way. What can we do directly to let the World Bank know that we want to stop this before it starts?
Historically, when you look at previous projects that the World Bank has run and they had to stop, it only really had happened when there was broad local outrage against the project. And this is what we're trying to build. But World Bank is not democratic. They don't have a channel for the people to channel their angers or write letters and so on. And there's nothing to say that they would listen to it. In fact, it's a closed organization, a very secretive organization. We really don't know who's running behind the scenes and so on. I mean, through our interactions with the World Bank, they've been anything but honest with us from the word go. So we cannot expect the World Bank itself to naturally listen. It has to be forced to. And one of the ways to do so would be through local outrage. But I do think that the states who are donors to the World Bank should also have a say in voting rights in the World Bank table. So, you know, the US, the UK, France, Italy, and Brazil, and all those countries, I mean, activist groups should approach their governments and make their concerns heard and request that the governments bring this topic to the discussion table at the World Bank.
I can't thank you enough for your time. You're brilliant as always, knowledgeable about these issues that are complicated but so important to understand. And thank you for all your time. And I just look forward to more conversations with you about things that people in the world want to know but don't have really a good person to ask to explain it in a simple way. So thank you, Ziyaad.
Thank you, Nora. It was a pleasure.
Okay, and I hope to see you again soon.